Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi, Mesechtes Chala, Pei Gimel, Halacha Aleph, God willing, starting Halacha Beis. We're learning today Daf Chav Zayin. We left off on Daf Chav Zayin, Amid Aleph, Mamish on top of the Amid, and almost the entirety of the Daf, other than at the end addressing something that we spoke out verbally yesterday, which is that in our Mishnah, I'm beginning with the end first, because the beginning is... it was going to be properly understood if we can all have fresh in our minds a couple of steps. But the end of the daf is that in the Mishnah we learned explicitly that even though, again, the chiyuv of separating challah is when the dough is fully kneaded. But if a person separated challah prior to the dough being fully kneaded, the Mishnah says that if what remains in the bowl, if the flour that remains in the bowl yet unkneaded is in the amount of 5 revaim or more, so this earlier separation of challah is not going to exempt that flour. But if the quantity of flour that's still unmixed, still unneeded, is less than the minimum shear, let's use the words bottle, it becomes bottle to everything else in the bowl, and the challah that one separates from the initial needed part, not only is that challah good to be matir, the needed part, it's good to be matir at all. That is what we learned in the Mishnah. Now, we had on Daf Chav Vav Amid Beis, we had a common practice of koihanois being asked to both knead the dough and to be mafresh challah, and on the side, they would keep the challah because that was their upside of doing that work. The reason why people would ask women kohanim to knead the dough and to separate the challah was all because of people's desires of not having challah that's tamei, that's bisman, when that was something that was still possible. And therefore, the kohanos that were kneading and separating the challah, they were doing it in the environment of people that were amaratzim. It was in an environment where there was a lot of tumah. So they themselves were concerned that their separation will become tamei. Everything will become tamei. So they always needed a very small amount of flour, and ASAP they separated challah. And then we learned a certain declaration, stipulation that these kohanos were trained to say. Now, before we get into that, which is really the bulk of today's daf, the Gemara at the end is going to ask, it's clear that when these kohanos would separate challah, you did have in the bowl 5 revaim or more of unmixed flour. Our Mishnah says that that flour remains unrectified. The kohanos obviously were doing something in a way that rectified everything. So how do you reconcile it with the Mishnah? We spoke it out. So the Gemara says, "Anachanami." If the person separating the challah from the initial blended dough doesn't articulate any stipulation, then what the Mishnah says stands. But since they made a stipulation, that stipulation gets around the law of the Mishnah. Now, I want to repeat the stipulation, and then I'm going to show how what we learned in the beginning of Daf Chavav right away creates a huge problem. What was the stipulation? And I'm going back to Daf Chavav Amid Beis, and I'm reading the following: that they would knead the dough. Guys, they just started kneading. They needed a very small amount. They separated a piece, and they right away said that what they are doing is not yet to go into effect. That's the key. When will this separation become challah? So they would say that harei challah al ho'iso hazois, this that I'm separating will become challah for that which was already needed, va'al so'oir hamis'arav ba, and for the sourdough that might not even be here. That's a bigger chiddush. It's not even here. But the person, the kohanos, knew that she will mix it in. For that, va'ala kemach sheneshtayr ba, and for any amount of flour that's currently here, yet unmixed, va'ala keretz sheniton tachtel, and if you have pieces of dough, but it detached itself from the main part of the dough, which is something that happens when you knead. At the end of it all, you mix it all together. But when she was mafresh, this initial piece, to be designated challah later, at that time, there might be other krotzim of dough that's not connected to the one from which she removed the challah. Doesn't matter. She's saying that lichish etala gula gush echad, when they become a single mass, then, in other words, when I finish kneading it all, then hugdash zeh shebiyadi l'shem challah, then this that I separated will then become challah. This was the key of the Tanai. Then I'm going to add another detail because that's going to be negeya, aside of the fact that we're making a chazara, and then they would add another statement. Mashelimdu dis koihanois chutz min atamei sheba. Chutz min atamei sheba means that if in the piece that she removed to become challah later, I'm going to call it the designated challah, the piece that is designated to be challah. What happens if some of it is tamei? So what she's saying is that if any part of what I separated is tamei, was tamei, or will become tamei prior to this piece becoming challah, then this piece is not to become challah. I'm excluding the piece if there is a piece of tamei dikado. Now, a lot has to be addressed on this, but the Gemara today is beginning with the following. We learned in the beginning of yesterday's daf, on daf Chavav Amud Aleph, we had a implied understanding from our Mishnah, which is that when a person is kneading dough, they could separate challah before any stipulations, even if they didn't yet mix the minimum share, which is a problem. It was the fact that the Mishnah was only concerned about the remaining unmixed flour. The Mishnah never spoke about the need, the necessity of the woman or the man who's separating challah to mix at least 5 revoim. The Mishnah never spoke about that, which implies that there is no such a need. But how? How can that be? And the Gemara yesterday brought down a machlokes between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. It's beautiful. This is for today's daf, that both Rabbi Yosi and Rabbi Yoina made a comment yesterday, B'shitas Reish Lakish. It's evident that that's how they learn. So let me review that. So, B'shem Reish Lakish, you're right, our Mishnah is only following Rabbi Akiva. You're right, according to the Chachamim that hold that even B'di'evid, if a person had lesser than the 5 revoim of kemach that they kneaded into a dough, from which they separated challah, the Chachamim hold that separation is nothing. It's not effective. You don't have challah. There's no chiyuv to separate challah, so there's no tevel. And it's not challah. Anyone can eat it. Our Mishnah only follows Rabbi Akiva, who holds that even though you're not chayiv to be mafresh challah from a lesser than the shear, if you did it, it's effective. That was Reish Lakish. I want everyone to know that we don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva. So when Reish Lakish says that our Mishnah follows Rabbi Akiva, what he's also saying in between the lines, that since we don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva, such a separation would be invalid. That will be the problem that we're going to deal with today. But I want to go finish yesterday. Rabbi Yochanan says, I disagree with you. Rabbi Yochanan says, when you taka only have less than the shear, the Chachamim say any hafrasha made from it is nothing. But since you have in the bowl to be kneaded here in front of you, the shear or more, even though you only needed the beginning of the shear, based on the words of Reishis Arisoy Seichem being understood by Rabbi Yochanan, to also be merames, that when you only begin to make the dough, your separation is valid. We don't view it that you separated challah from less than the shear. You cannot separate it kemach. Kemach cannot be challah. I know that. So you can only separate the piece designated to be truma challah from dough, from mixed, from blended flour. I know that. But in the bowl, since you have the shear, it's not a problem that the needed part is less than the shear. Let Rabbi Yochanan, we have nothing to question on that which they trained the Kohanis to say. The kasha will be only Reish Lakish. According to Reish Lakish, he doesn't subscribe to Rabbi Yochanan, Divrei Hakel. According to Reish Lakish, according to the Chachamim, not Rabbi Akiva, If you don't have the minimum dough, if you don't have the minimum share needed into a dough, you can't be mafresh challah. From what we read, the words that they will limdoi esakehana is to say, take now challah, and say that this is going to be effective for whatever I'll be doing in the immediate future. It's not mashma that they needed a shear. They did it right away. The whole purpose was to make sure the challah doesn't become tummy. So they would begin to mix.
How did the Kohanet come up with that stipulation?
The Kohanos did not come up with it. First of all, nowadays they would. Nowadays they'll learn it. But in those days, the Chachamim trained the Kohanos what to say. By the way, for the men today, we go to Eretz Yisrael. What do? We follow the card. When I went to Rabbi Herzl, I knew, but I didn't know. You follow a procedure. Follow the card. Okay. This is a great question. And that's basically the whole daf. And the Gemara is going to give you three approaches. Very different one from the other. And then we're going to speak about how the Tanai circumvents the Mishnah. And I hope I'll have time, even though we started a few minutes late, even though it's a very small daf, that hopefully we'll start daf koyach, and we'll start with the Mishnah. The Mishnah gives you one rule in the beginning, just to say it right now, which is fascinating. That whenever hafrashas chal is only midrabanan, zman hazeh, or always b'chutz la'aretz, if you have dimua dough, what's pshat dimua dough? You have flour that is just regular flour, into which truma flour got mixed. And you don't have the ratio of 100 to 1. So this is called a mixture that prohibits a non-kohen from consuming. Guys, the muah dough is completely exempted from challah. Not you discount, you deduct the shear of truma, and you only remove the echad miyah 24 from the rest. No. The muah is completely exempt from challah. When the chiyuv of challah is only midrabanan. That will be the first din that we'll read inside if we'll get. Okay, so the Chevra Daf Chav Zayin Amud Aleph. We're dedicating this class l'refuah shalema to Hatamim Michal ben Chamadina, and the Gemara begins right away with the answer. The problem we just spoke out, and it's beautiful that the first two opinions, Rabbi Yossi, and another approach, Rabbi Yoina, on Daf Chav Vav, they were the ones that quoted Reish Lakish, or they made a comment explaining Shitas Reish Lakish. In other words, they learned our Mishnah, that when is one able to be mafresh challah from a small amount of kneaded dough, small amount meaning you don't even have the shear, that's only l'shitas Rabbi Akiva. We don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva. So think about, let me just give you more words. There's a rule, b'chlal, by all trumas u'maisres, including by challah, you cannot be toidem min aptur ala chiyuv. It doesn't work that way. So what's the problem here? Here, you begin to knead, you take off a piece of chal. I get it that it's not yet being chal. I know you're making a stipulation. It's only going to go into effect later. Okay, fine. But don't forget that this was taken from a piece of dough that is putter to have challah removed from it. So this should be considered you are mafresh min aptur. When is it going into effect? When your entire bowl was kneaded up. There you do have the shear. This should be a typical case. You're taking a piece of dough that came from ptur and you're using it to be mater chiyuv. Even b'di'evet it's not good. It should be min hara ala yafa. B'di'evet could be good. Many ideals when it comes to min hamukav, not min hamukav, that we learned it's a din of lechatchila. Mind you, there's no min hamukav here. Just to make it clear, I just chapped. When these kohanos were taught to separate right away and to put it on the side and just to say it should only go into effect when we finish the work here, right? I'm not going to Rabbi Eliezer that you make a bridge. You make no bridge, you do nothing. Okay, it's preferable to have challah, that's the hoira, rather than to do it min hamukav and go into the problem of maybe the whole challah is tameh, or there's a suffix of tuma. So toilen, it creates chaos. Min hamukav is a din of lechatchila, not a din of b'di'evet. That you can't be mafresh min al-ptur al-achiyav is a din even b'di'evet. That's the problem that Rabbi Yossi has. That's the problem the Gemara has, and a solution number one is Rabbi Yossi, which is a big chiddush. So Amar Rabbi Yossi nidin advarim. It must be the word must is an exaggeration. It appears it's rational to say that this whole limdoi hakoyhanois was only ba'arvei Shabbosos. What's the yichus of Erev Shabbos? Most women bake challah for Shabbos. Not everyone bakes bread every day, which means that these koyhanois, that they were asked by someone, which is really representing a whole group of women, to be mafresh challah bitara, they weren't doing it with the flour belonging to one balabasta. They would gather the flour from many different people because everyone is making challah for Shabbos. And I'm going another step. Since they are starting with a tremendous amount of flour, let's assume, guys, that every balabasta uses 5 pounds. I'm just getting a mushal. But if you have 5 women, you have 25 pounds of flour. So when you begin to knead the dough, it goes proportionate. When you are starting out with a smaller amount of flour, and these koyhanois were being mafresh challah from the beginning of the dough, from just the first step of them mixing the flour, mistaber that the quantity that you have is less than the shear, which is the kasha the Gemara is trying to address. The solution, according to Rabbi Yossi, is that when koyhanois did what they did, dafka ba'arvei Shabbosos, since shazu mevia and vezu mevia, so she's starting out with a tremendous amount of flour. Even the initial mixing of flour and water will already have the minimum shear. And therefore, yes, kemafresh michiyuv ala chiyuv. And look how he speaks that out, berachal bitchaktana, avol b'choil, but enachanami, during the weekday, where whoever is hiring these koyhanois is one, maybe 2, not a big group of women, which means that they are starting with a very small amount of flour. Tiknu bechala shetehei niteles minatoyer alatome. True, that even if, that's Rabbi Eliezer, even if you can figure out how to take min hatoyer alatome, which just for the record, that's the problem here, right, Danny? Another problem. The hafrash aschala of everything you were wondering is going into depth now. The hafrash aschala that these koyhanas were making, right, probably was still tohira, even though they said chutz min atom shiboy. I know they said that, but what are the chances that they're being mafresh chala and someone is going to make a tummy? Very, very little. It's very unreasonable that there will be any tumah. But on the other hand, that the remaining dough will become tummy was very reasonable. It's going to turn out at the end that they were mafresh min hatoyer ala tamei. And no one is making a bridge over here. So we have a general concern not to take min hatoyer ala tamei. But we know that if one did min hatoyer ala tamei, it's going to be valid. Don't forget, we're speaking about challah is a din toira. Let's go with those who hold that midrabanan, you should not take min hatoyer ala tamei. Yeah, the Chachamim can be machmer, they're not going to be mekel. It means if you did it, b'diavad, you'll be good. Another din. Ideally, lechatchila, you're supposed to be mafresh challah like truma min hamukaf, in close proximity. But we also know that if you didn't do it min hamukaf, b'diavad, it's going to be truma. In our case, it's going to be challah. But there is one halacha that even b'diavad won't be good. Shema miptur ala chiyuv. This, even b'diavad, is not good. Ubemela, bottom line is, Rabbi Yossi is saying that limdoi hakoyanois was only erev Shabbosos, and what's the magic of arvei Shabbosos? Since mistame, in most cases, the koyhanois is being given not the flour from one household, but she's being given a composite of flour from many, many households. There, even in the beginning of the kneading, she's going to have the shear. That's Rabbi Yossi's answer. The bomb question that is not resolved, just to speak it out, against Rabbi Yossi, which probably is why Rabbi Yoina and the others argue, is that, guys, we started the second chapter, and we spoke it out many times already. When you have flour, right, in the case of the Mishnah was a baker, that doesn't even belong to one person. Not that the baker wants to sell it to many women, but maybe he won't. When the flour already belongs to different women, which means that after you make the dough, you will divide the dough and give them back to different people. Let me speak about the initial Since many women gave flour, you even in the beginning of the kneading, you have the minimum share. But that minimum share belongs to many women. That minimum share, right, is going to be, in other words, the dough at the end is going to be broken out and weighed and given back to its owners. In that case, when you need to have a shear, you have to have a shear from one owner. That's the problem against Rabbi Yossi. Now, the potential solution would be is that every woman gave the kohanos the minimum share. Everyone gave it. The only thing is that the dough that she made from which she's being mafresh challah, that dough has the minimum share, but that dough itself belongs to many women. I'm going to say the following. Maybe since the challah itself that she's removing is going to one kohanos, compounded with the dough that she began to knead. That dough also might go to one of the women. Maybe it's considered belonging to one person, vis-a-vis having the minimum share lahafresh challah. Question is better than the answer, but at least to know that if you have the question, everyone asks this question. And that's answer number one. Rabbi Yoina, as we had on Chavav, also giving opinions b'shem Reish Lakish, that means he subscribes to Reish Lakish, has to contend with the same. Don't forget, Rabbi Yochanan, there's no kasha here. Kasha is, according to Reish Lakish, separating challah from dough that doesn't have the shear only is valid Rabbi Akiva. We don't paskin like Rabbi Akiva. So when they told the kohanos what to do, what was the issue? It doesn't work. They at least should have articulated only be mafresh this challah when you have the minimum share. They never said that. So Rabbi Yossi's answer is, well, they only did it out of Shabbos. Out of Shabbos, it's a given that they're going to have the minimum share. Amar Rabbi Yoina, mamish adarabah. Rabbi Yoina tells Rabbi Yossi that not I disagree with you. I'm saying the opposite of you. You are saying that limdoi hakoyanois was only arvei shabbosos, by the way, erev yontiv also, and not on the weekday. I'm going to tell you in the other direction that they only did it during the weekday, this limdoi hakoyanois, and it was dafka never done on erev Shabbos. Now, to understand how Rabbi Yoina answers the kasha, I'm going to leave that for the end. I do want to verbally first explain Baal Peh what Rabbi Yoina is addressing. Rabbi Yoina right now is addressing a new problem. And Aviv, you were struggling with this. When the woman says the stipulation, the last words that the Gemara recorded on the top of Chavav Amid Beis is this woman said, Chutz min hatamei sheba. What does that mean? Chutz min hatamei sheba means she separated a piece. She's saying it's not going into effect now. It's going to go into effect when everything is needed. But what is going into effect? Either all of it, the part that she separated, but if any part of it became tamei, I don't want to have challah tameya. So that piece of dough, if it became tamei, whenever it became tamei already, it's becoming tamei now. If it will become tamei at any point prior to that piece becoming challah. Once it's challah and it's tamei, there's nothing you can do. But at any time, maybe some of it is already tamei. Maybe some of it, all of it is tohira, but maybe by the time I'm going to finish kneading the dough, somehow a piece of it will become tamei. Now, if all of it becomes tamei, you got a problem. But maybe only a piece. If that's what happened, that piece is not becoming challah. I got a problem with that. What's the problem with that? What will be that piece? What will be the status of that piece? That's tamei. It's not challah. What is it? So I said yesterday, just to resolve Rabbi Yoina's problem, to get around it. Oh, so that piece becomes rectified. Why would it be rectified? The woman is saying that my separation of challah should be for what? Should be for the so'oir that I'm going to put in, should be for the unmixed flour that I'm going to mix, for the karatzim that I'm going to reconnect. If the kohanis also would have said, and also for the piece of tamei dough that's in it, that would be good. If she would have verbalized that, if anything here is tamei, it will be rectified by the piece that's tahar. Then you're good. But that's not the nusach of what the Gemara said. The Gemara said the nusach chutz min ha tamei sheba. All she said is that I was mafresh a piece. This is to become challah later. But if part of it is tamei, the part that's tamei is not to become challah. So what is it? It's tevel. Not it's challah, not it's being rectified. What did we also learn yesterday or 2 days ago? Tevel is a davar sheyesh le matirin. Tevel is davar sheyesh le matirin. When you have tevel that got mixed into anything, is oiser b'chol shehu. So the Rabbi Yoina is saying that since the exact words that we had on Chavav Amideis, Mashalimdei HaKoyanos, at the end was to say, Chutz min hatamei sheba, not ve'al hatamei sheba, but Chutz min hatamei sheba. Now I got a new problem. The new problem is that Taka, what would happen if that piece is Taka Tami? What do you do? Now hold on a second. There is a solution according to Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. We said we paskin like Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Good. What did Rabbi Elazar ben Arach say? That then you have to make the following declaration: that the part over here that's tevel, from it you can make declarations. You can be mesakin it, but you can't do it on Shabbos. You can only be mesakin it during the week. So an Erev Shabbos will be the day in which you for sure cannot do what the Gemara said. Amar Rabbi Yoina loy mistabra. The law b'choil. What we learned, it makes no sense to say that it was done in any other time other than on weekdays. Dafka not be'erev Shabbos. That's great. During the week, even if you have a suffix, if there's tevel, and tevel is oiser b'kol shuhu, there are things that you can do to be mesakin it, but we can't be mesakin. We're not toirim u'ma'aser on Shabbos. We're not doing that. So this was dafke not done on Shabbos. Now on Erev Shabbos, it's not like an Erev Shabbos you can't do it. You have to have a new nusach. Look inside Daf Chav Zayin Amud Beis. Avol be'Erev Shabbos, not that she says chutz, not chutz min hatamei sheba. She says ve'al hatamei sheba. That resolves it. Which you can always say that, but that's not what the Gemara said. She said, Avol be'Erev Shabbos tzrichi loymar. I'm adding the girsa of the Marafulda, not ve'hatamei, but tzricha loymar, not he ve'hatamei sheba, but ve'al. Take out the word he, take out the vav. That's his girsa. Ve'al hatamei sheba. That's gavaldik. But during the week, okay, very good. Now Rabbi Yoina is masber. Lama. Really, we have a problem. Now, Rabbi Yoina did not yet address Rabbi Yossi's problem. What's Rabbi Yossi's problem? How can she be mafresh challah? How could she be mafresh challah when you don't have the minimum share? He's not addressing that yet. All he's saying is, don't come and tell me that they did that ba'arvei Shabbos. What the Gemara said, they said, may not be said ba'arvei Shabbos. So here, like this, he's showing you the problem that whatever you do is problematic. Ad shaloi teyasa gush echad. Hini tell us l'shum challah. If she's going to separate the dough right away before you mix the whole thing, that's what it sounds like. The whole reason why you hired the kohanos is because there was a fear that in a very quick amount of time, somehow the dough will become tummy. So therefore, you want her to begin mixing it. She's a woman that's nemenes, that she's tohira, and she'll separate right away. Problem with that is, Rabbi Yoina doesn't have to say it, it's self-understood, is that since she separated it from the lesser amount of a shear, that's called ptur, even though it's going to be chal later you have, everything is blended. At that time, the separated piece is called ptur. How can you be mafresh min aptur ala chiyuv? So if you're going to say, mishet yasa gush echad ki kadesh l'shem chala, if you will only, if you're going to only separate it, let's learn that pshat, when it's completely mixed. And now there's already a likelihood that some of it is tamei. If the words that she will use, which are the words the Gemara gave us, im oimer at chutz min hatamei sheba, okay, so the little piece in this separated dough that's tamei is not becoming challah. But you're not saying that it's being rectified. You're not saying that the challah should be for it also. You're not saying, you're just saying chutz min hatamei. So now you have in that piece of challah, you have a piece of tevel. What will the kohanos do with that? You have tevel mixed into challah. Nimsa tevel tamei morav v'challah. But the solution for that is mitoich sha'at oimer. And again, the girsa would be ve'al hatamei sheba. Then you solved it, because then you separated a piece. That piece might have tuma in it, and you're saying that if that piece has tuma in it, not only will it not be challah, we don't want to have challah tameya, but the part that's tohoida that is becoming challah is being matir everything in the bowl and the tamei part. So now it's chulin tameim. That's what I said yesterday.
The tamei part of the challah that he separated?
Part of the challah that he separated.
Anyhow, when you have a problem, like, I have a little piece of dough that sort of...
So we spoke out yesterday that these doughs, sometimes they broke into pieces, and it's only if the piece, and they're still touching each other, and it's only if the piece that will become tummy is less than a kibetza. Okay. And now chulin tameim. So first of all, Rabbi Yoina insists that the nusach.
Then why would it be an issue even if it's tevel, like whatever?
No, because why not make a solution that resolves everything? So now the kohanos can take that piece and she can go home and eat it. It's challah, she can eat it. And even if a part of it is tamei, as long as the chashash is on a small piece, they watch tuma. Maybe a little piece will become tamei. Okay, so that little piece is less than a kabetza, so it's chulin tamei. So says Rabbi Yoina, loy mutaf lahafresh miptur alachiyuv v'lo yehei tevel tamei ma'odev b'chala. So when you have problems, let's compromise of making sure that we only have the least of the problems. What will be the least of the problems? The bigger problem is having tevel tamei ma'odev b'chala. Tur al-chiyuv is not such a big problem. That's the way it sounds like from Rabbi Yoina. In other words, let me go back to how we opened today's daf. How can the kohanos be mafresh challah from a small amount? Under the circumstances, this is better than that. But that's not accurate, because being mafresh min aptur ala chiyuv is ineffective. So everyone understands pshat in Rabbi Yoina, even though he doesn't say it befedish, is that he does not see this to be real ptur ala chiyuv. Why not? Let me go back to the case of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if the unmixed flour is less than the shear, is less than the shear, when you're mafresh challah from the dough, it's misaken everything. Why? You can't be mafresh challah from flour. So that's ptur. Menachiv al ptur. The answer is that since you will be mixing it, don't come davar shaloi bala oilam because it's biyad al so it's there. We view it as if she did it. As we said yesterday, from the perspective of the dough, the flour will become part of it. We don't view it to be separated. Let's use this logic in the opposite direction. It looks like min aptur ala chiyuv, but it's not min aptur ala chiyuv. Why not? Because the little bit of dough that you began to mix, from its perspective, you will be mixing more and more and more and more and more. So it will ultimately become a dough that's, in other words, even though he ascribes to Reish Lakish, that says our Mishnah only follows Rabbi Akiva, it's not mamish only Rabbi Akiva. And according to the Chachamim, it looks like min aptur ala chiyuv, but it's not bonafide min aptur ala chiyuv. That's what Rabbi Yoina has to be saying.
So why, according to this answer, is there a real difference between during the week and Friday?
The only difference is on the nusach that we had, that they told the kohanos to say A, B, C, D, and the last line is chutz min hatamei sheba. That's inaccurate. The wording should have been ve'al hatamei sheba, and taka erev Shabbos they would say ve'al hatamei sheba. In the weekdays they didn't have to say that. The question is even on that. The Marafulda says, okay, let's go to the last piece. Amar Rab Shmuel bar Rav Duma. Here comes the final bomb. Now, I want to tell you something, that the word lemafreya, which we use and heard so many times, means retroactive. Even in yeshiva and lumdis, lemafreya, mikano lahaba lemafreya, don't ask, all of these splitting of the hairs. Lemafreya means retroactive. I want to show you that the Gemara over here is using the word lemafreya, and it doesn't mean what it meant any time we learned together. Because really, what are we saying, Aviv? That when you're being mafresh chala, the woman is making a stipulation that what I'm separating is not becoming chala now. When will it become chala? Later. Now here's the key of what the Rab Shmuel is saying. In the case of the Mishnah, where the hafrashas chala is happening now, for now, yes, according to the Shlakish, according to the Chachamim, you have to have the minimum shear. In our case, there is no such a need. Why not? Because since it's only going into effect after you mix the entire bowl, so it's ki'ilu, you are mafresh, the challah from the entire bowl. It's not going into effect right now. Amar Rab Shmuel bar Avduma, since lemafreya hi kedeshay, or it's a rhetorical, is it not that it's going retroactive? What's the retroactive? Not retroactive, but there is a certain retroactive. You know what a certain retroactive is, Danny? Is that when it's being chal later, we view it as if she separated it when everything was mixed together. The kneading is pushed back to the past. She's saying, I don't want it to go into effect right now, because she wants for it to be mated everything in the bowl. The Mishnah says you can't do that if the remaining is the shear. So it's only going to go into effect later. So we can view it as if she separated it from the later. Later, you have the shear. That's his solution to this problem. The kivin shekadesh lemafreya is kim mifareshes mechiyuv ala chiyuv. I think this is gavaldik. Let me word it this way. I know we spoke about this just 2 weeks ago.
Then it's not in a mukha.
But maybe that answers min hamukaf. When we spoke about Zman, it's amazing how God's holy name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the pshat of Yud Kei Vav Kei is past, present, and future. But we say past, present, and future all together. Altogether could be misunderstood to think that God is above time. Of course, God is above time. But if above time, you wouldn't say past, present, and future. You would say Eke. I am what I am. That means, these are words of Chassidus, that the Nimna HaNanois, that the greatness of God is that He is above time, in time. So we spoke about how the present actually changes the past. This is Mamish, it changes the past, it redefines the past. So that's exactly what we're saying here. She physically separated the challah from less than the shear. When is it going into effect? When you have the shear. When you have the shear later, we move that back to the past. And now we view you separating challah from the shear. This is unbelievable. And that's the meaning of lemafreya. That the present goes back. Okay. And now the final part that we said.
Does that solve every scenario?
Yeah, but doesn't
whether there's extra flour or whether there's not. Like
the way the Gemara is saying, what you're saying is that how can they bechlal limdu kayhanois when what they had left was more than the shear? Our Mishnah says that if you have more than the shear, it's not matter the shear. So that's the same thing what you're saying. So frek the Gemara lama li ubavat shelo yehi sham chamish zevayim kemach. Right? Why didn't the Chachamim tell the Kayhanois, you can only do it if you don't have the shear left? Our Mishnah says if you have the shear, it's not going to be effective. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi, Masnisa, our Mishnah was speaking about before the Chachamim came up with this way of circumventing all of it. In other words, our Mishnah was written prior to any stipulation. Koidem achuloi limdu asakayhanos. And in other words, if you're not making a stipulation, if when you're separating the challah, you're not saying, I only want this to go into effect later. If you're not saying that, that's when the Mishnah says, if you have more than the shear or more, that won't become rectified. But limdu kayhanois is that I'm being mafresh challah, but I'm saying this is not challah now. It's only going to happen later. In such a scenario, it's both sides, according to Rav Shmuel. Not I need it from the minimum shear, even lachachamim against Rabbi Akiva, lidei shlakish. Nor do I care if there is the shear remaining, because I put everything together. I view it as if everything is together. Everything together means everything is mixed. Everything together means I have the minimum shear. There's no ptur over here, and I'm being mafresh challah. The fact that this played itself out bisman in pieces doesn't disallow for there to be a unification of zman altogether. L'mayla mahazman b'toich hazman. That's the lamafrei over here.
Sounds like a great solution.
It sounds like a great solution, and we have another minute, and now we're going to begin the new Mishnah. And here comes the big chiddush. Now, guys, one thing. This Mishnah is only when hafrashas challah is midrabanan. When hafrashas challah, Mashiach is about to come, and according to many, independent of that, when the majority of the Yidden will live in the Holy Land, the obligation in the Holy Land of separating challah will go back to be a biblical obligation. Then what we're learning now is not relevant. But when hafrashas challah is only midrabanan, what happens if you have dough that's meduma, not challah meduma, dough that's meduma before it became tevel? It means I have flour, it's normal flour, into which fell trumadika flour. I don't have the ratio of 100 to 1. Midrabanan, a non-kohen cannot have any of it. The whole thing is meduma. Now the owner knows, 99% of it is not truma. One would have thought when you don't have to take challah off truma. So normally you would think, okay, if 1% is truma, you're being mafresh challah 1/24th, deduct 1% and then be mafresh challah. No, says the Mishnah. If you have meduma, you're not chayiv to separate challah at all. But that's only if it became meduma prior to it becoming tevel. Let's read this line. Nidma isasa, if the isa itself, if the dough itself becomes meduma, if it became meduma, that means if truma fell into stam flour, or dough challah fell into the beginning of the mixing. Achalei gilgala. What's the magic of achalei gilgala? That was what we learned in the previous Mishnah, that when you're making a dough from wheat, what did we learn? When is it tevel? Bonafide tevel. You can't even have achilas aray when you fully need it. No, once it became chayiv, you can't be mated it, became meduma. But if prior to the chiyuv kicking in, it becomes meduma, says the Mishnah Patur, it's completely exempted from challah. This is amazing. Why? Because of the rule shamaduma pater. Eloma, if you have a dough that already is chayiv and chalaviv, you have a dough. You didn't separate challah yet. Some genius put in their truma. You can't be mated it. Then you do the proportion. In other words, I have something over here. I know that 1% of it is truma. Okay, so when you separate the echad esrim ba'arba, deduct 1%, and from the remainder take a 24th. You can't exempt all of it just because it became a duma, because there was already a chiyuv to separate challah.
In the first scenario, where you say it's becoming exempt, what does that mean? You have to take the whole dough and give the entire thing?
No, the opposite. You get to eat the whole dough, and you can invite Omri as your guest, but you don't have to give him anything.
You said you don't have to sell it to him?
No.
You can't sell it.
No, you don't have to give it to him. You're exempt. No, it's a big kula.
Saving yourself from challah.
Mamish.
Has some truma in there. The truma belongs to the kohen.
That's something else.
The rest of it, which is not the kohen's, you're saying you could sell it to him or something.
Yeah. So the truma you have to resolve, but that's not a problem. You take when you gift him. Oh, one second. Danny, you're right. Meduma can never be eaten by a non-kohen.
Right.
So what you do is you get to sell him the whole thing, and you deduct the percent of truma, but you get to sell it to him. But you don't have to separate challah. There is a machlekes rishonim what actually gilgala. Some rishonim hold that even if you began kneading it based on what we just learned, since biyodoi to finish kneading it, already then you don't exempt meduma. But we're going to learn the pshat. Actually, gilgala means that prior to you completing the kneading,